Hello again. We are Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 16 here to look at Alabama's path to a potential SEC championship and a first-round bye in the college football playoff. First, we will look at the schedule, and then we will look at offense and defense separately to give you some thoughts on how good we think both sides of the ball are and how much that will help or hinder Alabama in its path to a national title. Spoiler alert, much more help than hindrance on both sides of the ball. But Chase, the Crimson Tide are fresh off a beating of Georgia, not beating, but a decisive win over Georgia. Maybe not decisive, but a big win over Georgia. That's what I'm looking for here. And are ranked number one in our power rankings. They are ranked number two in the polls. And so we've got in the books, Alabama is 4-0. And the schedule ahead is tough, but something started to pop that the Crimson Tide could be potentially favorites in every other game.
Yeah, and I knew if Alabama won this game against Georgia, then the attention was going to be on Alabama, as this is Alabama's for real, and a lot of people questioned, back in January, hey, is Alabama going to be for real? Nick Saban's not going to be on the sideline. It's going to be Kalen DeBoer. Is he proven himself enough to lead this Alabama program? Well, I think Saturday night showed you that yes, Alabama's for real. Alabama is a contender for the national title. And yeah, I think we can have those conversations now with confidence that this Alabama's team for real. And we saw the way they dominated the first half. But I feel like you could take that game and put it into kind of two games. Yes, Alabama dominated the first half. Georgia answered in the second half, but Alabama found a way to win. And I think that's what the important takeaway from that game is, not how they blew Georgia out in the first half or whatever. When it mattered most, Alabama found a way to win. That's what good teams do, and that's what we see with Alabama.
Well, let's look at the path ahead. I'll have you pull up the graphic with Alabama's schedule. And you can see what's in the books. What you're looking at here is Alabama's power ranking coming into the game. And I've gone ahead and taken its power ranking and just plugged that in for the rest of the season, along with the power rankings of the current teams. That's points above and below average. You add in the home field advantage, either 2.5, 4, or against. And then the prediction is what the model says. The line to the far right is what the odds makers have said. And then result in the middle is what we've got. First of all, it's interesting. Alabama has been, I guess, better than the odds makers expected in 3 of their 4 games. And South Florida, I sort of give them a mulligan on South Florida at this point, because that's 2 years in a row. That's just been a tricky game for whatever reason. But you go ahead and look down the rest of the schedule. The closest game that we can see here, they're going to be about a 1-point favorite in Knoxville, according to this model. Now, I'm not sure that's going to hold. The model had them being 4-point favorites over Georgia. And every single remaining game, really by double digits in most of them, according to this. So you got by Georgia. That was the big concern. You take a loss there, it gets a little bit more concerning. But we did a video about Tennessee last week, almost rubber stamping its path to a playoff with its start. And Alabama's maybe marching towards that territory too, Chase.
Yeah, and I think that looking at this would be comforting for Alabama fans, seeing that, Tennessee's really the only game where you would say it's going to be a toss-up. You got Georgia behind you. We know Tennessee is going to be tough, obviously. I think the game at LSU is tricky. LSU, not like they were several years ago, but I feel like being in Baton Rouge, that could be tricky. Alabama struggled there at times. Maybe the Oklahoma game, tricky. Missouri possibly. But I feel like with Tennessee being the big one left on the schedule, Alabama doesn't have Georgia's schedule where you have Texas, Tennessee, and Ole Miss left. No, Tennessee's the big one left. And I'm not saying that the other teams are Alabama's just going to run over them. But Tennessee's the big one left on the schedule, the one that'll get a lot of attention. So, yeah, I think looking at this would be comforting for Alabama fans. And also, I think when you look at the scores in that result column, you have, Chris, 63, 42, 42, 41.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get an offense in a minute, but I think that's something else. If you're an Alabama fan, that could be comforting because this team can score some points.
Yeah, spoiler alert, that part gets even more comforting the more you dig into it. But I mean, look, the schedule, it's not going to be this easy, right?
Yeah,
You could easily take a loss at Tennessee. 15.5 seems like a lot for Missouri. I
it
think
does.
Missouri is going to get better. But that's in Tuscaloosa. I don't think South Carolina maybe will be as easy as it is here on paper of almost a 20-point game. That probably depends on Lenore's sellers, but Carolina's defense can force some turnovers and do some things. LSU is kind of quietly played pretty well for the most part. I probably should have taken a loss to South Carolina, but Garrett Nussmeier and that offense are pretty good. Defensively, they played better last week against South Alabama, despite losing Harold Perkins. And I think they're maybe getting used to Blake Baker. In Oklahoma, the defense will be good. The offense could be healthier by that point. That game's in Norman. And Auburn, you kind of got to throw out the records on that one. Everybody knows how tricky that is. So I don't think it's going to be as easy as it's spelled out here, but it is interesting just to take models which have no feelings on anybody and see what they spit out. And what they've spit out suggests Alabama's got a pretty nice path to a 1 or 2 loss season, or maybe even a 0 loss season.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this, the world of college football that we're in. You can take a couple losses and still find yourself either in a conference championship and in the college football playoff. That's just how it is, and I think it'll be that way this year in the SEC. I think it's going to be fascinating to see just with all these teams playing each other, who's going to end up in the SEC championship. But if Alabama continues to roll the way they are, I think they will certainly be in Atlanta.
Chase, we're going to talk about offense and defense and then briefly special teams. But before we jump into that, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff. Get in on our $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. Oreo's very excited about this. When the game... Chase, before we get into breaking down the offense and the defense, we remind you BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff. Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. Let's talk about Alabama's offense, Chase. Just kind of an all good news scenario so far. You look across the board. Alabama ranks number 1 in offense in the SP Plus ratings. They are explosive. 9.2 yards per play against Western Kentucky, 7.3 at Wisconsin, 8.4 against Georgia. When's the last time anybody had 8.4 yards per play against Georgia? It's been a long time.
Yes.
Mostly Alabama doesn't turn it over. They've had either 1 or 0 in 3 or 4 games. Again, I'm going to sort of throw out South Florida because for whatever reason, that is just a weird game for Alabama. 2 other things I like. You've got maybe the best offensive player in the country in Jalen Milroe. We all know that the most important player on your team is the quarterback, and he has proven it time and time again. And then finally, you got Kalen DeBoer. I mean, you talk about coaches with offensive pedigrees. He's on that elite list of college football coaches who know and understand offense.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere you look, there's stuff to like.
There is. And you mentioned Jalen Milroe, and I feel like the offense centers around Jalen Milroe. He's been terrific this year, and we saw him really come on last year, and I feel like he has really adapted well to Kalen DeBoer and his offense, Nick Sheridan, the offensive coordinator, and the staff, and he just looks terrific this year, and he's moving the ball well, he's throwing it well, he's hitting his targets more than I feel like he did last year. He's got a cannon for an arm, and I feel like he's really gotten control of it. He runs well. They've been doing some design reads for him, which they didn't do a lot of last year, and so they're really utilizing the strengths of Jalen Milroe. The staff is, and I think that's what you're seeing here is they're finding what he's good at and they're letting him do it. And he's got great receivers to throw to. Ryan Williams has been terrific. I feel like the run game, Jalen Milroe is a big part of the run game as well, but Jam Miller and Justice Haynes and the fact that they're also able to catch some balls out of the backfield as well. I just really like this offense and how Kalen DeBoer, again, has gone to the strengths of his players and is not just calling plays to call plays. No, he's found the strengths of his players and he's utilizing that.
Yeah, I guess if you want to nitpick, and that's kind of what you do a little bit when you're looking at a team that might be the best team in the country, is you sort of paint around the edges of the things that, probably aren't problems, but could be under adverse circumstances. They don't have a Derrick Henry or a Mark Ingram, but most teams don't these days. It's more of a committee thing, most backfield. So that doesn't really bother me. And they're averaging 7.0 yards per rushing play. Now, some of that's on Jalen Milroe, but rushing offense probably the best in the conference so far. And despite of it maybe not having some of the guys that Alabama's had in the past. And I think the offensive line, a few weeks ago, that was sort of our question. And I feel like the talk of that has died down a good bit.
Yeah, I think so too. And I feel like the team that Alabama has, again, is just and you mentioned in this position we're in, you kind of have to nitpick a little bit to find things wrong with a team like this. And there's plenty of things wrong with this Alabama team. And there's plenty of things that I think teams can expose. And I think Georgia did that in the second half of that game Saturday. But I feel like with this team, they're sound. They do a lot of good things. Now, there are some issues, penalties, things like that. But I feel like this is a very sound team. And I think that is going to definitely benefit them as we move through the year.
Let's talk about the defense for a minute. And one of my concerns is the offense a little too explosive because you score so quickly when you've got a Milroe and a Ryan Williams that your defense sometimes has just gotten to the bench and now they're back out there. But I looked it up. I guess the answer so far, not really. The time of possession, 30 minutes and 1 second. So they're basically dead average. The defense ranks 13th in SP+. It's not the Nick Saban top 1 or 2 defense in the country, but it's good enough with that offense. They've got 10 sacks, 16 hurries, 5 interceptions, and they played a tough schedule. So it's not like they are just racking up numbers against bad teams. Yeah. Jeff Sagarin ranks their strength of schedule 11th. Havoc percentage, and I think if you start looking at it that way, they're 57th nationally at team rankings. Havoc rate is the percentage of which you get a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, an interception, or a breakup. So statistically, they're not great there, but again, some of that is going to be baked in because of who they played. In the last glimpse we got, they did force 3 interceptions from Carson Beck, who doesn't throw a lot of them, so there's that. I feel like I'm more bullish on the offense than on the defense, but I'm not exactly, I don't know what the word is. Their defense is still pretty impressive. It maybe not as compared to the offense. It's not as much of a strength, but I still feel like there's a lot of stuff to like there.
Yeah, and the secondary for Alabama is young, and I think you saw that in the second half of the Alabama-Georgia game where Georgia was just really able to pick them apart and get big plays on them and get behind the defenders. That was really one thing I noticed watching the second half of that game is Georgia was just able to get behind the secondary, and that's how they got a lot of those big plays, guys wide open down there. And so I feel like we're seeing some of the youth of the secondary at times for Alabama. But for the most part, I mean, they've done their job and they've been in some big time games and some interesting situations that I think will help this defense moving forward. But yeah, the way they were able to get turnovers against Georgia, I thought was huge, like for this defense against a really good offense. And then the way they really locked down Georgia in the first half, and they came out rock solid there in the first 2 quarters. And so there's a lot to like about this defense. The youth, I think, could be a problem. But again, they're getting good reps against really good teams. and I think that will most certainly help them.
I think if you're looking for concerns, statistically so far, they are 89th in SP plus in special teams. Now, I think that's probably an early statistical fluke. Graham Nicholson was the top kicker in the portal, a preseason All-American. James Burnett, their punter, pretty good. If returns get to be a problem, Alabama's got athletes all over the place they can put back there. My thinking is that's probably a fluke, but it is something that pops up on the stat sheet when you're looking at concerns for Alabama.
It is, yeah, and that's something that they're going to need down the road. That it's going to need to be good and reliable through this season. So yeah, you say concern, and I think you can put that under concern. But yeah, that's something that I think needs improvement more than anything.
Now, I think where I am concerned, and this is feels like it's been a concern year over year lately, penalties.
Yeah,
Alabama right now, I'm looking at team rankings. They are number 120 of 134 in penalties, and I think yardage might even be worse. I'm looking that one up on the fly. But that is one place where we saw some lack of discipline at times right before half. You saw one late in the game where they did a little, I guess, talking after a touchdown. They didn't get flagged for it, but, you catch the wrong official on the wrong day. That's one thing Nick Saban at times, even had issues with it. He's the biggest disciplinarian on the planet. So I think that is one place. You remember what happened in Knoxville a couple of years ago when he had the penalties just undid them one after another. I think that's probably my biggest concern of this team. And again, it is clearly under Alabama's control, but it has been a problem.
it has been, and that is a concern, I think, because the penalties stack up quickly and can put you in some very unfortunate situations. It can turn a good play into a bad play very quickly. And so, yeah, I think that is something that needs to be corrected, especially when you get on these road games like Tennessee and LSU and where things may be heated more than others. I think it's really good to keep your composure, one, but also just play discipline, whether it's a penalty that, a personal foul where it's just, emotion a lot of times, or if it's just, mental, like a false start or holding or something like that. They need to get those things corrected. And if they do, and if they play really disciplined football, it can really benefit them for sure.
Yeah, yards per game is a little bit better. Alabama ranks 118th. Again, this is at team rankings, and I think they just count the games against other FBS teams. So there may be some variation in this where, you have some games with some FCS teams that don't count for some other teams. But either case, it doesn't really matter. Alabama has had some issues with both of them, but I think that's maybe my biggest concern for them so far. But hey, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot to bite off in terms of concerns. I mean, I think this team, to me, we had some question coming into this season, Chase. We just didn't know with all the new faces and the new coaching staff, and it wasn't a team where you could just name the Alabama starting lineup like you
Yeah.
could in past years because of the portal. I think these questions about how good is this team have been answered fairly decisively so far. I feel very good about Alabama's chances of making the college football playoff and frankly, appearing in the title game in Atlanta too.
I do as well. I mean, a lot can happen. There's a lot of football left to be played, but right now, if they keep playing like this, I mean, the possibilities for Alabama are endless.
Yeah, well, we'll be here to talk about them, good, bad, or indifferent. We do all kinds of football content every week on our channel, from previews to rankings to reactions. And we do team-specific videos like this one from time to time. We also cover basketball and baseball, even in the off season, pretty consistently. So if you like that, hit the subscribe button. That costs you nothing. Hit the thumbs up button. That helps our analytics and helps us get found. Leave your comments. And if you're interested in advertising, we reach millions of people every year. Caroline.smith@southeastern14.com. For Chase Robinson, I am Chris Lee. You have been watching Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.